Hey everyone, it's Miss McClellan here. Today this video is going to finish up sort of the start of the French Revolution. And just to remind you where we left off, the National Assembly has broken away from the Estates General. They are doing their own thing. They took the pledge of loyalty to the cause of the revolution at the tennis court, called the Tennis Court Oath. They stormed the Bastille, they have weapons, and now they are ready to make some change. The first thing they do is they issue something called the August Decrees, and it's creatively titled that because it was issued in August in 1789. It was basically a series of new laws that brought about the end of feudalism, which was the system where peasants lived and worked on the land. Basically, they were as servants, okay? So it abolished that system. The nobility agreed to abolish this. They also abolished courts run by the nobility, which kind of gave them more power, so that was gone. And in addition, the church gave up the right to collect payments from the rest of the population, which previously had given the church more wealth and therefore more power. So right off the bat, the National Assembly, which keep in mind is the third estate, they broke away from the Estates General and formed their own group. They've already created this new law that is more effective than anything they had accomplished at the Estates General. Another thing they did was they issued a document called the Declaration of the Rights of Man. It was issued shortly after the August Decrees. It's modeled after America's Declaration of Independence, and basically it stated all the rights that people had in France and all the freedoms. Specifically, it said that all men were born free and had the rights of equality, liberty, security, and property. It banned imprisonment without trial, meaning that no longer could you just be thrown in jail for any old reason. You got a fair trial, like a jury or a judge would decide if you were innocent or guilty. It said that taxation was to be fairly divided among people according to their wealth. So it wasn't like the first and second estate didn't pay taxes and the third estate did. Everyone paid taxes and you paid according to how much money you make. It also said that the sovereignty, meaning like the power to make laws or do things, was with the people. So no law could be passed unless it had the approval of the people, unless it would benefit everyone. So again, things are becoming a little bit more equal, a little bit more fair with these new laws. King Louis sort of accepted these problems as temporary. He thought, okay, the third estate, they're going to go away soon. These won't last. But the unrest and the violence and the disorder continued, even though he accepted the changes. Several thousand women went to Versailles, which is where King Louis and his wife, Marie Antoinette, lived, and they forced the royal family to return to Paris. And this was sort of a symbolic move because the king and his wife were living in this fancy palace sort of far away in Versailles, and they said, no, you guys need to come back to Paris where this change is happening and you need to deal with it. So, yeah, just all kinds of changes are happening, and it's sort of unclear who's going to win out, the revolutionaries or the king and the nobles. Some counter-revolutionaries, those are people who opposed the revolution, were obviously the king and the royal family. So even though the king sort of accepted these new documents like the August Decrees and the Declaration of the Rights of Man, he was not on board with the revolution because the revolution basically meant he's out of a job, he doesn't have power, he doesn't have money. For the same reason, all the nobility and the higher clergy, church leadership, were against the revolution. Also foreign governments. So keep in mind that France is not the only country in Europe with a monarch right now. You've got places like Austria who have monarchs, and they are not fond of the revolution because, again, it's a threat to their power. Many counter-revolutionaries felt that the king should restore the ancien regime. He should put things back to how they were before. Some felt that certain reforms were reasonable, like, okay, some things we can deal with, but for the most part, they disagreed with the revolution. King Louis refused to take a stand. He was weak. He didn't really take a stand one way or the other. He just wasn't a very strong leader. Both the revolutionaries and the counter-revolutionaries lacked clear leadership. They all knew what they wanted, and they made all these demands, but nobody really had any solutions. So it was really hard to kind of move forward because no one had a clear plan of exactly what needed to happen. So little progress was made on either side. They tried to nominate certain people to sort of serve as a liaison, like a go-between, like an in-between between the revolutionaries and the counter-revolutionaries. One of these is a guy named Lafayette. He was a member of the nobility, but he was a little bit more moderate, kind of in the middle. And he was supposed to help communicate between the revolutionaries and the counter-revolutionaries, but he wasn't really into it, wasn't really enthusiastic about it. So again, little progress was made. The people revolting made little progress, and then the people against them made little progress. Another law that was written by the National Assembly was called the Civil Constitution, and this was perhaps the most radical law that they had issued so far. Remember, you've got the August Decrees, which abolishes feudalism and other things, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which does exactly what the title says. It lays out the rights of French people. And now you have the Civil Constitution, and this law is all about the church. Okay? So it really attacked the church and took away a lot of the power that they had according to the Ancien regime. So a lot of these reforms were pretty controversial because a lot of people, even though they weren't up in the church leadership, they were members of the Catholic Church, and they weren't really big fans of these laws. The first one, it deprived the Pope of his authority over the church. He was no longer able to appoint archbishops or bishops. Instead, those positions would be appointed by state officials, like government officials. It also decreased the number of districts under control of a bishop. These are called bishoprics. Okay, those were reduced. So the church has less control over certain districts. Some church offices, like church positions, were abolished, done away with, and the clergy were going to be paid by the church rather than the state. So it used to be that some of the taxes that the Third Estate were paying, that money was going towards paying the salary of the clergy. And now they were saying, no, the church has to pay that themselves, and the taxes are going to be used for other things that are not related to the church. At first, a lot of clergymen said, okay, yeah, we can deal with this. But then, at the end, they added a new law that said, by the way, you have to pledge your loyalty to each and every one of these laws. And the clergymen did not like that. So the Civil Constitution really created this split in France, because if you were on the side of the church, which many people were, it was hard to support the revolution because this law really, really limited the power of the church. It was kind of like a slap in the face of the church. All right, so again, we're going back to King Louis and what his reaction was to the revolution. Like I said, with the issuing of the Civil Constitution, which really attacked the church, the divide between the revolutionaries and the counter-revolutionaries was getting even wider. People were getting more violent, more discontented. They were just upset. Things were not good. The situation had not improved. Violence was getting worse. In addition, King Louis is facing pressure from foreign monarchs who are saying, hey, King Louis, what are you doing? We do not support this. He was probably worried that they were going to go to war if the revolution continued. And King Louis felt that if maybe he left France and went to go talk to these monarchs, maybe the situation would get a little better. That's what some of the history books say is the reason that King Louis attempted to leave. You can sort of make your own decision about that. Regardless of the reason, King Louis and his family did attempt to escape from Paris on June 20th, 1791. Their goal was to get across the border and meet up with Austrian troops who would escort them into Austria so that King Louis could sort of talk to the leaders of Austria about coming up with some sort of solution to this revolution, and to sort of get them to be on his side. This did not work. They left in the middle of the night in a carriage. They wore disguises, but the disguises were really crappy and didn't really cover them up. And so they were arrested at a place called Varennes, King Louis and his entire family. King Louis and his wife Marie Antoinette were thrown into prison, and that is where they stayed until they were both executed in 1793. His children, I'm assuming, went to live with relatives or something, but moral of the story, King Louis failed to escape. He attempted, he failed. He was thrown in prison. So now you have King Louis, his wife, are both in prison. The situation is getting more and more unstable, and I know you just can't wait to see what happens next. But that's all we're going to do today. So make sure that you've taken these notes and that you've written questions that you have. If you don't have any questions, if you feel like you understand it perfectly, you still need to come up with some higher level questions to share with the class. All right, have a great day.